Hey everyone, welcome to another Clean Machine Live. My name is Geoff Palmer. I'm the CEO and founder of Clean Machine. And today we're going to be talking about what our ancestors ate. Okay, now when I say what our ancestors ate, we back in scavenger days would eat pretty much almost anything that we could consume that wouldn't kill us. So beyond that, though, what did we predominantly eat? Now, why is this important at all? Well, because a lot of people use this as an excuse, because there is a false assumption that was based on tools we found that were fossilized around burial sites and things like this, around living sites, earth and that found animal bones. So these are some of the things that lasted a long time. Obviously, most plant matter just decays completely, and you don't have any ontological, you know, um, evidence of what we consumed. So we needed to find other ways of finding out what humans actually consumed. So before we get started, as always, this video is for informational, educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Okay, so brand new study came out. Let's go ahead and put that study. 2024 study just came out this year. The study was titled Stable Isotope Chemistry Reveals Plant Dominant Diet Among Early Foragers in the Andean Altiplano. Okay, that's in Morocco. And of course, some people who wanted to debunk the study were immediately saying, hey, wait a minute, that's only in one place. You know, that doesn't, you can't make sweeping assumptions about that. And that much is true. But let me explain why this study is so important. Because we had already studies showing oral microbiome. Now, why is oral microbiome important to deciding what we ate? Well, as we eat stuff, we chew. And as we chew, different microbes will digest whatever it is we're chewing in our. It's how we kind of pre-digest some of our foods. Okay, so if we were eating starches, then we would have a lot of starch-eating bacteria in our mouth because they would populate because we're consuming starches a lot. So you're feeding those starch-consuming bacteria and they multiply. So that we have a lot of evidence in our oral microbiome. Now, how is that possible to have records of ancient Homo sapiens sapiens? This part is cool. Plaque on our teeth. Okay, so all humans get plaque on their teeth from consumption over a period of time. That plaque on the teeth, as those oral microbiome organisms die, they get into the plaque and we have DNA evidence of them. So when we dig up these fossilized jawbones and fossilized teeth of early ancestors, several 100,000 years old, that DNA is still in the plaque of the teeth. So we can look at that plaque of the teeth, look at the DNA, and identify exactly what were the predominant oral microbes that were in our mouths. And by telling what those microbes were, they were predominantly starch consuming microbes in our oral microbiome. Now we know that the only way you would have an abundance of that is by eating an abundance of what those microbes eat, starches. Now, this makes sense on so many levels, but let's take a look at the first study. But that was the microbiome study, the oral microbiome. So we needed three kind of pieces of evidence. One, what were the foods that they were consuming? And this oral microbiome study shows it was starchy plant foods. Two, we needed to know, and I'm actually going to skip to number three, we needed to know what foods they pooped out. Well, good thing some of our poop gets fossilized. And we can take these fossilized human poop and we can analyze it. And when we do, regardless of where it is, now this is what counters the negative comments on this 2024 study saying it was only one place in Morocco that they studied. The coprolite research looked at coprolites all over the world on 4 or 5 different continents: Africa, North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. So it looked at these, oh, and even Australia. It looked at these and said, okay, what are we pooping out? Because obviously, if we're eating it, we got to poop it out. So by looking at our poop, we could tell what we were eating by and large. Now, we could really tell by what we were eating because the amount of fiber that was in the poop. They were eating 100 to 200 grams of fiber per day. Now, fiber is only found in plants. So the only way you can poop out fiber is to consume fiber. And the only way you can get fiber is by consuming plants. So showing that our poop had 100 to 200 grams of fiber in it meant that we were eating 10 to 20 times as many plants as common Americans are today, since we're only consuming about 10 to 15 grams of fiber in a typical American diet. All right, so 10 grams of fiber a day is what Americans are currently eating. Our ancestors were eating 100 to 225 grams of fiber a day. Okay, if you think, eating some plant-based meals will get you full, which can because they're voluminous and full of fiber, imagine eating 200 grams of fiber in a day when we're only eating 10 grams of fiber. Yeah, that would mean they were almost eating entirely, if not exclusively, plants. That's the only way. When you eat vegetables, they take up more volume in the stomach. So in order to get 10 to 15 grams of fiber, like in the standard American diet, that's still going to take up some space in the stomach. Imagine 200 grams of fiber. There's no room left in the stomach for anything else, pretty much. So even if they did, grab a lizard or catch a mouse or something like that and consume them as supplemental, it was a minuscule part of the overall diet. Okay, but the third part is, all right, we know what we were eating based on our oral microbiome. We know what we were pooping out, so that was evidence of what we were eating. But actually, could we tell what was being utilized, absorbed into the tissues, and specifically the bone of the human beings? And that's what makes this study so interesting. What foods actually made up the body? So we know from the oral microbiome study what we were consuming, lots of starchy vegetables. We know from the coprolite studies, coprolites are fossilized human poop. We know what we were pooping out, and a lot of fiber, which only comes from plants. There is zero fiber in any animal product whatsoever. Okay, so we needed something in the middle to say what was actually being utilized by the body. Okay, and that's what makes this 2024 study so powerful. It sews everything else together. One, now we know what we ate because of the oral microbiome was telling us what we were putting in our mouth. We now know from this new study what was actually being used by the body from our diet. And we know from the coprolite study what we were pooping out. So we know what we ate, we know what was used by the body, we know what was going out of the body. That's what makes this study so exciting. Now, how did we know what was being used? Stable isotope chemistry. So all food has a signature, so to speak. So when we look at that signature, when we find it in bones, we can see the nutrients, what type of nutrients they were, if they come from plants dominantly or animals, like heme iron. Heme iron exclusively comes from animals in our diet. Now, our human body can make its own heme iron, but plant iron is a different form of iron, and that can be measured too. Same with vitamin A. Vitamin A in its vitamin A form comes almost exclusively from animals. There are some sources of vitamin A, but the vast majority of plants have beta carotene, and a lot of it. So it's a precursor to vitamin A. So these things that we can see how they change because each one of these forms has, many of these different forms of nutrients have a specific stable isotope signature. Now we can look at the bones and see if that signature is there to identify what we do. So let's see what they found in the mixing models. All right. So when they looked at this isotope chemistry, they revealed that plants dominated the diet. 70 to 95% of the average diet of early humans from this part of Morocco was plants, was plant origins. Plants, maybe mushrooms too as well. They were included in the diet. And of course, some microbial activity too as well. Microbes can actually produce proteins and some other nutrients that our body uses. If you have fruits that are fermenting, if you eat fermented foods, if you just basically our own microbiome. If we're eating a lot of fiber, we have a lot more food for our microbiome, so our microbiome can increase in quantity and density and in diversity, because we're putting different foods into our body. So this is pretty amazing. Up to 95% of the human diet back then, based on this isotope research, was plants. Okay, so let's take a look at the other studies. I always put the studies up here with the links. You can see the link in the green down there on the screen below. And this one is an article. Now I'm posting the article because it's a Harvard published article in the Harvard Journal, because it is actually a review looking at a lot of different studies. If you go to this link, you can actually see all the studies listed. Instead of listing, half a dozen to a dozen studies, I'll just let you go to the link, read the article, because the article synopsizes what's found in the research. But what did they find in the research? Okay. Coprolite research, which is fossilized human poop, reveals that prehistoric populations relied heavily on plants in their diet for over 10,000 years. We now know that actually goes back probably even earlier, as far back by some estimates as 780,000 years. I'll go ahead and put that on the screen if I can find it. Here we go. So this is from a different study, but it is in reference to that study. Hominins, which is early humans, were roasting nuts, tubers, and seeds about 780,000 years ago. We have evidence of this by leftover plants that they threw in the embers. So usually what they do is build a fire, let it cook down to coals, basically, or embers, so that it'd be heat, and then they could just put it in the embers or around the embers in the soil and let the heat roast them. So plant carbohydrates actually constitute, still to this day, about 55 to 80% of the modern human diet. So we've taken this all the way from our early stages of human existence, all the way through to modern humans eating 55 to 80% of the diet globally, based on the FAO and WHO reports from 1997. So, okay, so let's go back to the coprolite research. So 10,000 years, heavily relying on it. This is how far back the research goes on the coprolite research, which is the fossilized human poop. But okay, where was that done? Well, fortunately for this, they're pulling from studies of coprolite research all over the world. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so in Africa, the average fiber consumption per day, based on all the coprolites that they gathered and recorded, analyzed, found 120 grams of fiber per day. North America and Mexico, 150 to 225 grams of fiber. They were eating a lot of maca. They were eating a lot of tubers. There was a whole host of different potatoes that they had and yams. In South America and Peru, 100 grams of fiber per day, and same with Australia. So the very minimum on 4 different continents, North America, South America, Australia, and Africa, 4 different continents, all the coprolite research is from 100 grams up to 225 grams of fiber. Remember, the average American is eating 10 to 15 grams of fiber. So they were eating 10 times as much fiber as the average American today. So take all the plants that you eat in a day, all the salads, all the veggies, all the fruits, and multiply that times 10. Now, if you're eating 10 times the amount of plants you're eating right now, imagine how much volume of food that is in order to be pooping out 100 grams of fiber per day. They were just regular people back then, very regular. Okay, but you can say, all right, but what good is all that fiber? Well, fiber feeds our microbiome, and then our microbiome feeds us. Up to 60, 70% or more of our energy comes from the processing that our microbiome does. You feed them, they feed us. That's how it works. But there's more to it than that. Let's take a look at this next study. The role of short chain fatty acids in the interplay between gut microbiota and host energy metabolism. Now, this is something that we didn't know up until the last probably decade, that we assumed, fiber just passes through us. Maybe some of it, soluble fiber gets into the bloodstream, helps with reduction of cholesterol. Oh, those are all good things, but we don't do anything in it. We don't digest fiber. We now know that's just flat out false. We do digest fiber. We know the exact mechanisms which we digest fiber. So here's an interesting thing. We have a latent gene. We used to, in our early days, especially back then when we were eating 100 grams of fiber a day, we used to our own body produce cellulase, the enzyme to break down cellulose. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This is an example of symbiotic relationship. Okay, so early humans eating a lot of fiber, our genetics were producing the cellulase enzyme to break down that cellulose and turn it into short chain fatty acids. Short chains, but they're still fatty acids. Fat contains more calories than carbs or protein by unit. Okay, so this was a good source of energy. As a matter of fact, modern day gorillas, not equating gorillas with human metabolism, they're different. But as an example of metabolism, gorillas get up to close to 60% of their total bioavailable energy from the digestion of fiber. 60% of their total energy intake. Now, what about humans? Well, humans had this amazing shift in our microbiome. Because we were eating fruits, we were eating greens, we were eating nuts, we were eating seeds, we were eating all kinds of tubers and vegetables and starchy vegetables and squashes and all these different things. We were just grabbing everything, putting it in our mouth, see if it worked, so that we could consume these. Remember, this makes so much more sense because this was readily available all around us. 300,000 edible plants on this planet. And animals are faster than us, stronger than us, and able to get away from us. So it wasn't way later till we developed some tools that we would be able to do that. At the best before then, we were scavengers, picking up somebody else's leftover, like a carnivore's kill or something like that. Okay, so when you look at that, you say, okay, our biology shifted. Our body said, wait a minute, our microbiome is better at breaking down the food than we are, and they feed on polyphenols from plants. They feed on prebiotic fibers from plants. So these fibers were an important food source, and our microbiome was important because we needed a rich and diverse microbiome. So our body did something pretty interesting. As an adaptation to cooperate with our own microbiota, our body turned off that gene to produce cellulose. Now, why would it do that? So that we wouldn't digest the cellulose. We were eating tubers and starches. We were getting a lot of energy from the tubers and starchy plants that we were eating. So we didn't need that extra fiber. And our body said, yeah, but our microbiome would really benefit from that. So let's turn off that gene that produces cellulose so we give more food to feed our microbiome. They explode in population and then start chewing up the plants and making them more bioavailable to us. Win-win. That's what I love about human evolutionary adaptation and our dietary pattern. We see that we still have that latent gene, but it's inactive. And the assumption was, oh, we don't produce cellulase now, so we don't digest fiber. And that is still not true. We have other mechanisms to do it, but we dominantly let our own microbiome break down that, because our microbiome has over 6,000 different enzymes to break down fibers, all different kinds of fibers, starchy fibers, prebiotic fibers, inulin fibers, all these different forms of fibers, soluble and insoluble, can be broken down into short chain fatty acids, which we can use for energy. Now, can humans use fiber for energy? And sure enough, from that study, let me go ahead and put this study so you can see which I'm referencing. This is the direct quote. Fermentation of fiber accounts for about 10% of all human caloric requirements. Now, this is based on the modern diet, right? And if we're only eating 10 grams of fiber, 10 to 15 grams of fiber per day, and we're still getting 10% of our total calories for the day coming from short chain fatty acids from fiber, fermentation of fiber. Our microbiome, through fermentation, breaks down that fiber, churns it into short chain fatty acids, and our brain can use it, our gut can use it, our cells and tissues can use it, our immune system can use it for energy. So 10% of our energy coming when we're only eating 10 to 15 grams. Imagine if we were eating like our ancestors at 100 to 200 grams, how much energy we could get coming from short chain fatty acids. Pretty cool. But back to starches. That was a good source of energy. And again, if we're eating all this fiber from green plants, from starchy vegetables, all these rich sources, nuts, grains, seeds, tubers, if we're eating all this fiber, imagine how much energy we're producing through the cooperative digestive efforts of our microbiome and our own digestion and utilization of short chain fatty acids. But a much better source would be tubers. These are your potatoes, your starchy root vegetables. This is a great study, 1999 study. So we were already in 1999, 25 years ago, we were already seeing that it was clear that tubers actually spurred the evolutionary growth of our brains. Now, why is that? Okay. Let's go to this study, 2019, more recent study, cooked starchy food in Earths from way back. Hominins were roasting nuts, tubers, and seeds, grains as well, 780,000 years ago. Okay, so when we look at the oral microbiome, we see they were eating starchy vegetables because we had big time amounts of dead starch-eating microbiome, oral microbiome in our plaque on our teeth. All right. And this is a quote from that. The findings also push back on the idea that Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens sapiens were top carnivores. They were not. Given that the brain, and this is really important, the brain requires glucose as a nutrient source, and meat alone is not sufficient enough to supply the brain with all the glucose it needs. Okay, and I'm sure some of you are going to say, okay, wait a minute. What about keto? What about, ketones? All right, we'll get to that in just a second. But if we look at our current starch diet today, and this is from FAO, WHO reports, starch currently makes up about 60% of all the calories humans consume worldwide. So we're still starch-based diet eaters. Still, 60% of our diet is. Why is starch so important? Because starch contains 300 to 1,000 units of glucose. All right. And what is important for glucose? Well, glucose is the foundational molecule for everything. Almost everything is made from glucose. Carbohydrates are made from glucose. Fats are made from glucose. Proteins, yes, are made from the glucose molecule. They simply bind on nitrogen and some other molecules, and that forms that glucose into amino acids. This is how it's made in the plant. The plant starts out with a glucose molecule. So everything you eat, fats, fiber, carbohydrates, and protein, all four of the macronutrients, all four are made from a glucose molecule as its base foundation. Why is that? And why is the human body adapted to that? Well, it's because we can take anything, fiber, fats, carbs, and protein, and break it back down into glucose to use for energy. Because glucose is the single most important nutrient for the brain and for the production of ATP, the energy molecule for the entire body. Okay, let's dive into this research, the glucose requirements of a developing human brain. All right, so we look at the human brain, and the adult human brain at rest consumes approximately 20 to 25% of the resting total body glucose consumption rate. That means 1/4 of all the glucose that you consume in an entire day is taken up and fed to the brain. So this is nearly double that as the required by our next evolutionary cousin, the chimpanzee. Now, this is really important here because, we're compared to the primates. We're in the primate category. Human beings are primate, just like chimpanzees are, but our closest relatives genetically are bonobos. And our brain consumes twice as much glucose as our nearest evolutionary relative. This is how our brain was able to expand. Because it required so much glucose, it couldn't grow if it did not have enough glucose. And our brain consumes twice as much as other primates. How much? The average male brain uses about 80 milligrams of glucose per minute for energy and growth. That is a whopping 115,200 milligrams of glucose in a single day. Now, it's a good thing that our body can break fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and fiber all back down into glucose so that we can get this glucose for our brain. We are unique. The human species has a bigger brain than almost anything else. But this means two things. One, we have to come out of the womb sooner because our big old brains wouldn't fit out of the birthing canal because it just wouldn't fit. Remember, anybody who's given birth knows that the head's the hardest thing to pass. So we come out early, so we're underdeveloped. Now, most animals, including almost all herbivores, within a short period of time are fully mature. Human beings have a really long brain maturation, all the way up to 18 years, 16 to 18 years before our brains are fully developed. Why? Because our body has to consume enough glucose to allow it to gradually get bigger and smarter and more functional. And it takes a long time to get that much glucose fed to the human brain. Fat won't do it. Glucose is what it needs. This is why glucose is so important. This is why starch is so important. It is the richest source of glucose of all the plants. Richer in glucose by quantity and by weight and by density than fruit, grains, other things. Grains or beans are considered starchy vegetables too as well. So this is why beans, grains, tubers, nuts, and seeds were such an important, and we saw this all the way back 700,000 years ago, that human beings, almost 800,000 years ago were roasting nuts, tubers, seeds, and even grains that we found in the fire pits out there to mobilize these starches, allow them to be more digestible, and allow this source of glucose to get in us so our brains could grow. We see that from the oral microbiome study, we can see clearly the Harvard researcher says the brain requires glucose as a nutrient source and meat alone is not sufficient. Meat has practically no glucose in it whatsoever. And proteins are the hardest to get glucose out of because it takes releasing that nitrogen and then creating ammonia and creating other things that can be toxic if there's too much released at once. So the best sources of glucose are starchy vegetables or quick releasing fruits. This is why many people see that chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest ancestors, are considered frugivores, very fruit heavy diet, because this is quick, easy, accessible glucose. That's what we're looking for. Now, I am not saying, oh, quick, easy glucose, go out and drink a bunch of sugar. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. Whole foods have fiber. Whole foods have polyphenols that regulate this glucose uptake and processing. They help the body. They feed the fiber, and the polyphenols also feed our microbiome so that they can help get the body a steady and healthy supply of glucose going in. So you don't spike the glucose, which can end up causing issues internally. You don't want these heavy spikes and valleys. So we see through all of this research that we have now, number one, we know what foods, because of this oral microbiome research, we see what the humans were eating back then. They were eating starchy vegetables because we see the bacteria on their teeth. Number two, through the isotopes, stable isotopes, these signatures are in our bones. We know what was being metabolized. We know what was being utilized to build the human body. And that stable isotope tracing, that form of chemistry, can identify exactly where those nutrients, many of those nutrients, are coming from. And it identified that 70 to 95% of the nutrients that were making up the human body were from plants. And then finally, the thing to seal it all, what we were pooping out. And we don't poop out things that the only way we can poop out something is if we've eaten it. Over 100 to 200 grams of fiber a day. Clearly, we're eating predominantly, and almost entirely plants. Okay, so now that we have this evidence, what does all this mean? Well, it means that this is what we were doing. Yes, we lived hard lives back then. We lived shorter lives back then, a lot because of early deaths. We were small people back then. And this was an issue. So it's not like we want to replicate what we want to do, but we need to stop using this as an excuse to legitimize our current dietary choices. All right. I've talked so much about other things. If you want to check out my other video on atherosclerosis, why human beings are herbivores, you can see really clearly that only herbivores get atherosclerosis when they consume dietary LDL cholesterol, which only is found in significant quantities from animal products. So one, only herbivores get atherosclerosis. Two, atherosclerosis is the #1 cause of death of humans, right? And three, we know without a doubt that LDL cholesterol, dietary oxidized LDL cholesterol, does cause atherosclerosis. Now, what's interesting, the study also shows atherosclerosis does not happen in true omnivores like dogs or carnivores. Doesn't happen at all, period. Except if you take their thyroid gland out. If you take a cat or a tiger or a lion and take their thyroid gland out, then they will actually start getting atherosclerosis just like human beings do. So it's really clear human beings are not meant to get atherosclerosis, period. You can take a rabbit, a horse, or whatever, and if you feed them animal products, they will 100% of the time develop atherosclerosis. Now, it's interesting. We know that only herbivores get atherosclerosis and that atherosclerosis is the number one cause of death in humans. Ergo, human beings are herbivores, since only herbivores can get it by consuming cholesterol. Carnivores and omnivores do not get atherosclerosis at all unless you give them an appendectomy. I mean, a thyroidectomy. Okay, so don't do that to the animals. Don't make them suffer the disease we do. And don't cause that disease by eating dietary cholesterol, which only comes from animal products. Fiber, the good stuff that we were eating as early humans, only comes from plants. So this is really clear what we should be putting in our mouths to avoid disease states, to even reverse some potential disease states, and to live a long, healthy, prosperous life. We now have ontological, paleontological, anthropological research that verifies through 3 different mechanisms, the oral microbiome, stable isotope measurements of our bones, and what we pooped out. We have clear fossilized evidence all the way across the board what humans really ate, and we should take a clue from that and start consuming more plants. The more, the better. Thank you for watching. I wanted to go through this research because I know sometimes when a new study comes out, like the stable isotope research, that a lot of people are going to be attacking that single study. And it's not just a single study. It's 3 different studies that, when taken together, very clearly show what human beings are eating and what human beings should be eating in modern history. Thanks for watching. I share this information not to promote some ideology. I share this information in hopes that will help people not suffer and die or suffer from disease states when you don't need to. I want to share this information so that you understand the choices that you make and the consequences that may come from them, so that you can make better choices for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what those choices should be. Hey, I'm passionate about not harming animals, but I know that people are going to make their own choices. And I know I could wish that everybody would go vegan. That would be awesome. There'd be a lot less suffering on this planet. And hey, I'm down with that because I suffered immensely when I was young. So I don't want that for any other species, regardless of the species. It's why I do what I do. But I do this not to spout some dogma, not to spout some ideology, not to just be in the trenches about somebody's right and somebody's wrong. No, who cares about that? That's ego. That's garbage. What matters is quality of life. If changing your diet and understanding why changing your diet could help you live a healthier and longer and more successful life, that's what I want for you. But I give you the information, I give you the studies, I give you the links so you can look it up yourself and you decide for yourself what the best approach for you to live. When you come up, if you come up, and I hope you don't, with disease states, please take in mind this information, because it's never too late. Well, in some cases it might be a little too late, but it's never too late if you're an average American adult to make a change that can improve the quality of your life, extend the quality of your life, not just lifespan, but health span, how long you live in a healthy state, in an active state. I had 2 friends who we lost on Mother's Day. Both of them were mothers. It's heartbreaking when I hear these things, especially when I know so many deaths, unnecessary deaths, are due to 2 simple things: nutrition and exercise. It's why I do what I do. I love helping other people. It's my joy. It's my give back. It's what makes me feel good, what makes me sleep well at night. If I know I can help people improve their life through health, through nutrition, that's what I do. And that's why I go out and try to find the absolute best nature has to offer and bring it in products. We've got an extraordinary protein coming to market. It will be the very first of its kind in the entire world. It will be the first powdered protein powder to be 100% whole food and supply the nutrients that it does. Nothing else like it on the market. I'm very excited to be the first to bring this in this global launch to market, and I hope it really improves the health of a lot of people. That's my give back. Thanks for watching. We'll be back every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Pay it forward. Let's share this information. Give it a thumbs up. Give me comments and questions. Happy to answer them. And I look forward to the next one.